Welcome to our breakout session number 3. I'm a poet, and now I know it, using the Korean poetry form Sijo, to teach poetry writing. So you have the privilege today of learning from Dwayne Johansson, who's mentioned from the Excel Center here in Kokomo, Indiana, and he's been a teacher for over 30 years. So for the last year and a half, he taught as a humanities instructor at the Excel Center Kokomo. Prior to that, he was the educational outreach specialist for the Center for East Asian and Pacific Studies at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. For the past decade, he has been writing and teaching a style of Korean poetry known as Sijo, and has given presentations on writing Sijo throughout Illinois and Indiana. He serves on the editorial advisory committee for the magazine Teaching About Asia, is a member of the Committee for Teaching About Asia, and is on the team that awards the Buchanan Prize for Asian Curriculum Materials. In 2018, Dwayne was a featured poet at the Decatur, Illinois Night of Poetry event. So with that, take it away, sir. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you. Very nice introduction, thank you. I'm just Dwayne, so there you go. Okay, feel free to come on in anytime you want to with this. You know, we're not gonna make this, you just listen to me and watch the PowerPoint presentation. Or maybe do things behind the Zoom. You know, I can turn off the camera thing and do that kind of stuff. Not that I've done that in any of these sessions at all today, but you know, so. But they're only, I'll know if you try to duck out though. But okay. Let me tell you then, and I'll get ready to share my screen here with y'all. And you all have access to what I'm going to be sharing with you. This presentation was originally developed when I worked for the Center for East Asian and Pacific Studies. Well, originally developed for that, but I did a lot of the work for it when I worked for them. So we do have to give credit to the fine folks at the University of Illinois for that, as it may be and stuff. So this is a presentation that I use for my students too, and so you can adapt this and use it however you would like. So I wanted to show you what I use in the classroom, and so you guys can take this and use it as if you will, if you need to, okay? And I've been teaching poetry for a long time, and this is the one form of poetry that really engages students better than any that I've seen before. It is the one form that gets that, hey, I didn't know I could do that. Wow, look what I just created kind of a moment, which is so meaningful for students. And you know, students who never thought of themselves as poets before get to see that poetry is an inherent part of who we are. That's my belief, at least, okay? And so we're going to be talking about the Korean form known as a Sijo. And I'm going to start with probably the most famous Sijo, one of the first ones that was written down that we have a history of, at least. And so we're going to go back all the way to the 14th century for Sijo. And this is by Jungmung-jo. I want to talk a little bit about naming practices here before we get too far into this. I followed the traditional Korean way of using the family name at the beginning, so we're doing it that way unless their name has been anglicized. So when we mentioned the poet Linda Sue Park, who I put in the chat, you know, we're not going to call her Park Linda Sue, so kind of thing. Also know that there is no standard romanization to translate from the Korean Hangul to the letters that we use, and so if you've seen or heard of these people before but their names are spelled differently, that's just because there's no one way to do that, okay? This is probably the most famous Sijo of all time. It is taught to nearly all Korean school students. It is part of their cultural heritage. And we're talking both North Korean and South Korean for this particular case. Richard Rutt in The Bamboo Grove, a book that's referenced again in the chat, says that if you just start saying this poem to a Korean person, they will complete it, they'll finish or join in or something like that. So if you just start out with Imomi Jugo Juogo, then somebody else will pick up and finish it. But here's how it translates, at least in one way, to English. Though I die and die again, though I may die 100 times, long after my bones have turned to dust, whether there is life after death or not. My red heart, forever loyal to my Lord, will never fade away. Okay? Tell me what you see here, what you think this poem is about. What's going on for him, do you think? And then I'll tell you the story behind the poem. Anyone can go ahead and tell me what you see here.
It's all about loyalty.
Very good. That the loyal is the big thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. If you know anything about Korean history, you might know that 1892 was the year of transition between the Goryeo dynasty and the Chosun dynasty. Okay, and what happened is that the new leaders under King Taedong, then of the first king of the Chosun dynasty, sent a poem to Jung Mungjo saying, hey, are you going to be with us or against us now? Because he was politically involved in the ruling class for the Goryeo people. And this was Jung Mungjo's response then, where he said, you can do what you want to me. You can kill me 100 times if you'd like, but my red heart will forever remain loyal to my Lord. Anyone want to speculate as to what happened to him after that then?
He died.
He died. In fact, Mark, how do you suppose he died?
He was publicly executed.
He was, yes. Shortly after he came up with that response then, he was crossing this bridge then, which is in Kaesong, North Korea. It's actually a national monument now there. I have never been to it because North Korea. But the word is that you can still see his blood stain on the bridge there. And so this is that learning poem that's meant to show just the strength of loyalty for Korean students and everything and how important that was. The ruling class then of the first of King Taedong then, and that the first of the new dynasty then were so impressed that he stood up for what he believed in and everything, that posthumously they made him prime minister. You know, which was a nice reward for the guy from the other side and everything, okay? Here's what I like about Sijo, okay? When students are faced with writing poetry, I think a lot of times they get this idea that I can't do poetry, it's analytical, it's, you know, there's too many illusions and that kind of stuff. And when you try to get students to write poetry, if you just ask them to write a poem and don't give them any kind of structure for that, that kind of falls apart because it's too much freedom and they don't know what to do. They don't know where to direct themselves. But if you give them a highly structured poem, then that places too much of a burden on them to match the structure and not really worry about what they're trying to say in the poem. And Sijo does both of that. So it's a short poem, so you can express yourself pretty succinctly, and it gives you just enough structure that you have an idea of where your thoughts should fit into the structure here and how you can put things together into that structure, okay? So the traditional structure of the Sijo is that you have 3 lines of about 15 syllables each. Each line then is split into 2 parts, and so a lot of the poems that we're going to look at today are written in the 6-line format for that then. And it follows the first 2 parts follow that standard. We're going to introduce a theme, we're going to develop that theme, and then we're going to twist or turn it around with that final line here. And I think this is what poetry asks you to do about life anyway, is to say, here's something more about that thing. Now I want you to think about it a little bit differently than how you've thought about this before. And we're going to do that with some of the stuff that we look at here today. We're going to change our perceptions a little bit, perhaps. And then the final line ends with a resolution and says, hey, this is what I want you to learn from this, okay? Sijo is, of course, compared to haiku, compared to tanka or lushi, which are other forms of Asian poetry, and compared to the sonnet too, and that sonnets follow that same sort of pattern that you see here. You have that couplet at the end of a Shakespearean sonnet, which has that resolution kind of thing. And it should be compared to a sonnet because, like a sonnet, Sijo was originally a sung form of poetry. It's called Sijo Chong. And we'll get to that a little bit later on. Let's look at another really great example. This is one of my favorite Sijo. We're going to introduce a theme here. And see then by our first line, a shadow strikes the water below, a monk passes by on the bridge. These familiar cosmological, religious, metaphysical themes and such here, okay? And our second line is going to ask a question. So we have a speaker come in, speaking to this monk. Stay a while, Reverend Sir. Let me ask you where you go, okay? Now, this question or this comment is often a feature that you'll see in the first line of a Sijo poem. And so you see the form of, I'm going to ask a question, I'm going to answer the question for you in the second line, and then I'm going to tell you what I really meant then third line kind of thing, okay? We get our twist or turn here, which often takes place in the first 3 syllables. In this case, he just points. And we see now that we are taken away from this bridge here down on terra firma, and the monk points clouds, changes the question about where are you going completely here, and then just keeps on his way without turning or talking, as a monk might do. Okay, there you go. Before we count syllables, give me some ideas here about what you see, what you think. What is this poem making you think of? Anybody?
Head in the clouds?
Head in the clouds? Okay. That the monk is thinking about other things than what the guy talking to him is thinking about?
It's gotta be more than that, though. You know, like it's gotta be more than just that. I think the idea of the twist is what's getting me, the turn.
Okay, the he just points part there?
Yeah.
Okay. And first of all, Mark, it doesn't have to be about anything. If this is what you want the poem to be about, that's what the poem is about for you, okay? I can tell you that the bridge in all sorts of belief systems, but in lots of Asian belief systems, if you know the story of Izanagi and Izanami, the progenitors in Japanese mythology coming down the rainbow bridge from the heavens to start Japan and start the earth, basically. Start life on land. And so, but this poem was often interpreted as him saying, the question you want to ask me is where I'm heading should refer to, you know, my ultimate goal, which is to make it to my heavenly promise and stuff. So, okay. Let's count syllables here now, though. And 17 in the first one here. Again, this is in translation. Not sure how many are in the original as it is in Korean. A few less in 13, but both right around that 15 mark that we're looking for. And quite a few more in the last line here, 18 syllables. So we are a bit over the 45 syllables, but that's fine, okay? Okay, and this is a poem written by Chung Chul back in the 16th century. There he is. 2 marks there, the big hat, which is actually made of lacquer-covered horsehair, probably, and then the 2 cranes symbol identify him as a great scholar. He was also very involved in politics and stuff, and was well-regarded. Political figures, any important kind of man was expected to write poetry. So, I mean, they actually put poets on Korean money, for example, which I think is awesome, right? But they were often people of great power anyway. And he was known as being a bit hot-headed, like he necessarily didn't have that same sort of loyalty and steadfastness that we saw in the first poem, and behaved rather mercurially, that he could go hot and cold either way. And it's interesting then that there's actually a crater on Mercury named after Jeongchul. So there you go. Okay. This is Yishun Shin's famous poem from 1599. By moonlight, I sit all alone in the lookout on Hudson Isle. My sword is on my thigh. I am submerged in deep despair. From somewhere, the shrill note of a pipe. Will it sever my heartstrings? Somebody tell me what you see here. What does this make you think of? Picture
I love.
some sort of clue. What's that?
Oh yeah, the ship. I just really like the last two lines.
Okay.
Will it sever my heartstrings? Yeah, the power, the music in there.
And what do you think the pipe represents here? What else do we know about this guy?
He's probably a soldier of some kind.
Say that again, please, Jess.
He's probably a soldier or warrior of some kind.
Very good. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he's in great despair. He seems to be in great despair.
Yeah. Why is that? Why is he so sad here?
He has a decision to make from the sea.
Yeah.
It
Really.
seems like he's contemplating a decision that he has to make, and
This is a decision that can have some pretty dire consequences. It would seem.
yeah, life or death consequences, maybe.
Right. And I think the pipe, then that shrill note of a pipe says, time's up. It's time to make the decision here.
Right.
Let me tell you the story behind this poem. Isun Sin and the Battle of Hudson Isle. This is probably the most famous battle in Korean history. The Japanese were attacking with an armada that was a lot bigger than the ships that the Koreans had. They, however, had a secret weapon, which is these turtle ships you can see down below, and there's armor clad and stuff. It's kind of cool. They had little studs on top there, so they can't be boarded. So if the Japanese were to try to jump on top of the ship to board them, they couldn't do that. And Yi was able to lure the Japanese armada into this harbor where they only had a narrow way of escaping, and he then surrounded them using what's called the crane wing formation, and attacked them that way. And the Japanese didn't know what to do, and he captured 47 of their ships, killed 9,000 of the Japanese men. Not one of the Korean ships was lost, and I think he only lost like 17 men or something like that. And so it's considered this great victory by the Korean Navy over the Japanese and such. So pretty important victory for them. So, okay, this is a shijo written by a woman. This is Wang Chini then was Kiseng. This is kind of like a Japanese geisha. She was a highly educated woman, and was well known for her poetry and her love of language and stuff. And you can see this then, we've given you the phonetic translation into Korean down there at the bottom. You'll soon find out why we're doing that. And this is her poem called, this is her poem that she's most well known for, at least, Blue Stream. And you can see that's capitalized. There's a reason for that. Within these green mountains, swiftly coursing, I have to move this so I can remember it. Okay, there we go. Do not boast on reaching the open sea. It is difficult to return. The bright moon shines on the vacant mountain. Won't you rest before you go? Okay. And to make sure that we have enough time, I'm going to speed through this here. Okay. Bright Moon was the name that she was known by, her kind of stage name. And she is talking to an aristocrat who has visited that goes by the name of Blue Stream, and is telling him, hey, stay a little while longer. There's no reason for you to, go off quite yet, if you will. And so the bright moon shining says something a little bit more about maybe there's something more for you here than what you might think of. And the story is that he was so charmed by this and so taken aback by her forthrightness in saying this that he fell off his donkey when he discovered the note and then turned around. So, okay. As we said, Sijo is often sung, and it uses a style of singing that's similar to pansori, which is a traditional Korean opera, and it involves really elongated syllables and lots of vocal fluctuations and stuff. It's really kind of cool to watch. They'd be accompanied by a drum called the chongo and maybe a flute or something like that. I was at a seminar about Sijo, and we were learning about how they sound sung, and learned how to sing the first word, actually, of this poem. And so you get to hear me and some other English teachers who have no experience singing Korean poetry doing just that right now. Okay, that is not even the entirety of the first word of the poem. So it can be a little bit longer. Okay, this is a poem written by one of my students then, and she was really proud of this, something completely different than what she had done before. And you can see Sarah and two of her three children right there. A cold room full of fear, I sit and wait with a 5-inch needle in my spine. They slice my abdomen, my uterus, a new life at last, worth every tear and stitch. And I love how she takes the graphic imagery of the first two lines, and then with that twist in a new life, really changes kind of the focus of the poem there. Have it be about her giving birth. And so I wanted to share that with you because I was really proud of her work. We entered this in a contest, one of two contests, for Sijo writing in the United States. This one out of Chicago in the Sejong Culture Society. She didn't win anything, but it was cool to have her be entered in it at least. And then there's another Sijo writing contest that just finished up here out of Los Angeles at the Korean Cultural Center there. So, okay. This is from one of my favorite Sijo books. This one right here. Linda Sue Park's Tap Dancing on the Roof. And I'm going to give you the first two lines here. For this meal, people like what they like, the same every morning. Toast and coffee, bagel and juice, corn flakes and milk in a white bowl. Okay, those are the first two lines. Now, really quickly, can you give me an idea about what you might say in that last line, how you might twist or turn it around so it's not about corn flakes? Or in my case, bran flakes, because, I'm past 50 and that's what we do. Any idea about what you might write there? Again, there are no wrong answers in poetry, just your answers. So. Okay.
You can maybe something about like taking it and like creating something new, because you kind of have at the beginning, the first two lines, it's kind of about this repetition and what you like, but you have this white bowl, and all that came to my mind was like baking or cooking, and so maybe twisting it to create a new thing.
Oh, I like that. I like that idea a lot about breaking out of your routine kind of thing. Okay.
I would have said suddenly the doorbell rings.
Good. I think you're following Yi Sun Shin's then idea of a sound triggering a change, something like that. That's great. In this case, the sound that Linda Sue Park is referring to is the sound of the alarm.
Okay.
Wants to wake her up.
Yeah.
So, this has been really easy to do during lockdown time, certainly has been. Okay. So it can be hard for me here as we start our new term next week. trying to get back into that. Oh, wait, the alarm really means something now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're going to look at some ideas here to write poetry. I'm going to take you through the process of one of my poems here. Okay, this is a picture I took last year when I was on a study tour of Korea. So we're going to look at it like this now, and I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here and look at it from a slightly different perspective. In this case, a broader perspective. Okay. Tell me what you see here, will you please?
People visiting, it looks like a historical site, something,
Yep.
Taking photographs, you know, it looks like definitely families, different pockets of families. And then I see maybe like a two generation, like a, in front of you taking obviously looking and taking that picture.
Right, a mother and a daughter looking to
Mhm.
take a selfie is what it looks like. This is from the Bulgaska temple near Gyeongju. Okay, and because we don't have a whole lot of time here left, and I want to give you guys a chance to write your own poetry, let me tell you about what came into this here. We had been to lots of different temples towards the end of our 2.5 weeks in Korea, and had seen a very similar scene to this. Lots of people with their cameras walking around and such. Earlier in the day, we had visited the most famous Buddhist statue in Korea at Sekram Grotto. And there was a sign there that said, please don't take pictures of this. And of course, some people did still take pictures of it. And I was tired and hot and grumpy and looking at all these people in this sacred space, you know, taking selfies and such, and taking pictures and seeming to, you know, here we are in this Buddhist temple, you're missing out on the whole spirituality of this. And so I was going to write that poem then, and I worked on that for a couple of days, and these are the first 2 lines I came up with. She leans her head towards her daughter, smiling at the girl's outstretched hands. They laugh, oblivious to the crowds in the temple courtyard. Okay, so this whole thing about you're so much worried, you're just worried about yourself and who you are and everything like that and stuff. And I really wanted to sit in judgment of these people, these women especially, and say, you know, you're not doing this right and everything. And came to the realization about that was my problem. And so this is the line that I came up with to conclude the poem. Meanwhile, my own judgment occludes the serenity I seek. So I was so frustrated with them about not using this sacred space to find serenity that I had taken away my own opportunity for serenity, and you know, was missing out myself because of that. So, okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you a picture. We're going to change our perspective. We're going to do this a couple times here, and then I want you just to be thinking about what kind of poem that you could write. Okay, with this here. Okay, let me tell you about this statue here, okay? First of all, I want to tell you that the central figure there is a woman. You can tell she wears a female-style hanbok, which is a traditional Korean clothing and stuff. What else do you see here with this statue? What do you think? Why would somebody put a statue like this where it is now? What do you see there?
You see 2 children engaged. They're paying her attention, so whatever she's saying, it's got the children's attention.
Very good. Trying to get the children to pay attention. I love that response. Very good. Anything else?
It's definitely warm. It's inviting. You know, it's just kind of like she's nurturing them.
Right. We get nice, happy feelings about this, right? This makes us feel comforted and such, doesn't it? Okay, good, good. We're going to change perspective and we're going to focus then on this little plaque down there you can see, okay? And so now you're going to know the whole story here. I will tell you that this is taken from Taejongdae, which is a small island just off the coast near Busan. And this is what the statue is all about. It's a suicide prevention device. Okay. Things were pretty rugged in South Korea in the 70s. They had been under martial law, under a military rule for, well, since 61. And their economy was in pretty bad shape. In fact, was probably on par with North Korea's economy at that time. So it wasn't until the 80s until they had their really big economic boom and everything like that. And lots of people were using this spot as a place to go and kill themselves.
Jeez.
Jumping off that rock down there at the bottom, okay? This couple didn't jump, though, okay? I would hope, at least. And I don't know, after I took the picture, maybe we'll see. But the statue there, called the mother and children statue, then was really quite successful, and suicides dropped significantly after they put this statue up. And actually, I had somebody scan the QR code, and it actually worked through the PowerPoint presentation, which I thought was kind of interesting. So I haven't written a poem about that. If you were to think about what would you say about looking at that statue now that you know what this is, okay? This next statue that we're going to look at is one of the most well-known statues. I'm not gonna, actually, I won't say much more about this. Tell me what you see here, please.
A woman sitting on a chair. There's an empty chair next to her. And then it looks like, you know, somebody gave her a hat for some shade. They decorated her ankles, which I assume is to have a cultural reference as well. Yeah. And then she's wearing that.
Those aren't part of the original statue.
Correct, yeah.
Later, yeah, okay.
And then she's wearing that same traditional style Korean
hanbok.
Hanbok.
Yep. Anything else you see here as you keep looking at this picture?
I see two plaques beside her. Is that part of the thing?
In between?
Yeah.
No, that was added earlier too, or that was added later too then.
Okay.
I would note that there are some plaques down here at the bottom too, right? So.
Her body language, like her fists kind of look a little bit clenched.
Very good. I'm glad you pointed that out.
She is like sitting like very, very, like has really good posture.
Yes.
And kind of staring just straight ahead of her.
Okay.
And her facial expression is not happy.
No, not at all.
It seems she's anticipating something.
Oh, love that answer. Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
Happy expression.
We're going to change your perspective again. We're going to look at a side shot of this now. Does that change
the
anything
shadow.
for you? What's that?
The shadow.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
That's part of the artwork too. That's not a natural shadow. Yeah. So, because I've had some people say, "What happened to her hat? Why isn't there?" And I'm like, no, that's not it. Yeah. So, anything else?
Butterfly in her heart.
Yeah. And butterflies, of course, have lots of symbolic meaning and stuff.
Well, she looks like, what's kind of interesting to me is like it almost looks like her back is arched a little bit more, so maybe she's a little bit older, or like I don't know.
Very good. Very good. Anybody want to comment on what they see in the background?
Yeah. It looks like there's an umbrella, and it looks like there's a box, there's a pallet, so it looks like there's.
Yep.
Is this like an ongoing protest?
Ah, Mark, very good. Do you know the story of this
No,
statue?
I don't. No.
Okay. The palette there is actually, there are young Koreans, usually students, live there to guard the statue, because this statue is actually probably the most controversial statue in the world. Okay, there are
Wow.
versions of it that show up throughout the world. This one in particular is in Seoul, and she is staring at the Japanese embassy in Seoul. Okay, I can that a couple of weeks after I took this picture, there were 4 men arrested for spitting on the statue, which is why in the previous slide, there's a guard there during the daytime. The embassy is open and everything to protect the statue as well. Last year in Nagoya, Japan, they actually had to close down an exhibit that featured this statue, a version of this statue, because so many people complained. They got like 800 threatening emails and threats and stuff like that, that they closed down the whole exhibit, okay? And what this statue is, that this statue is in commemoration of the comfort women. Comfort women were Korean women who were brought into servitude, sexual servitude often, for the Japanese troops during World War II. And so it's controversial because it's really forced the Japanese people to take a harsh look at their history and what they did to Korea back in World War II. The Japanese government, of course, and Japanese people have wanted to deny that or just ignore it as best they can. And so, but they're getting this stare down from this girl with this empty seat and such. So
would that empty seat mean like the people she left behind? Something like that? The
empty seat is really open to whatever you want it, but that's certainly a great way to look at it. Yeah. Can mean anything really. So, yeah. And so really when you understand, and I've seen, I think, 3 different versions of the statue that show up all over. The plaques down here at the bottom are called Stepping Stones for Peace, and they are plaques that commemorate the names of the victims. So it would be the names and the hometowns of people, not just for the comfort women, but there are actually men that were brought into servitude to help build bridges and stuff like that for the Japanese during the war effort as well. So, okay, so we have just a little bit of time because we got started late and I talk too much, which I often do. So I'm gonna let you guys just try to write or come up with some ideas, or here's the things to be thinking about if you wanna write these or if you wanna get your students to write them too here, okay? Look at those pictures. If it can be another picture that you have in your mind that's significant to you and you wanna think about it. Sarah wrote hers about a picture that she had of her kids, by the way, which is the one we looked at earlier. Okay, so think about something that's important to you. Again, for my students, I usually say getting an education because that's why they're at the Excel Center. And then make people see you or it a little bit differently. Okay, and wrap it up. Those are the 3 steps for writing a Sijo. Okay, for what you're doing here now, I wouldn't worry about keeping this format. Don't count syllables. If you can just do the 3-step process, syllables and all that other kind of stuff can come later. So you're just kind of doing a first draft for a poem. She is great because you can write one really quickly, which means that you can rewrite them equally quickly. David McCann from Harvard, the author of Urban People, Twisted and Straight, which is mentioned in the chat, calls them a 10-minute poem. And we don't have quite 10 minutes yet, but okay. So this was where we were supposed to break into breakout rooms, but since it's just a few of you. Any ideas looking at those pictures that we looked at or anything else going on in your head? I've been trying to come up with a way to write about refusing to wear masks and turn that into a poem. That's the one that's been working its way through my head here. So if you have any ideas about what you might think of or something like that, if you've jotted down something, you can do that then too, okay? So this would be where you would read a poem to your group if we had enough time to do that. So if you guys want to talk about some ideas that you might have or anything, or if you just have any questions or anything else about Sijo with our last few minutes here, I'm happy to do that. there's our
Yeah, I love the idea of the twist in Sijo. I feel like there's several things, like even the one that you wrote about having to change your own perspective. I love that type of
It's
kind
been
of
a
like
tough lesson, yeah.
self-reflection, but I think it also is really important for our students to see that. And then the other thing is I think part of the, you know, the things that had me interested in this session in particular was just that one, I've had a lot of Burmese students in the past. I've had one Japanese student, and I've had a couple Chinese students, and then I have a couple Nepali students, and I
Right.
haven't had any Korean, Chinese students. And so what I've had is an interest in, you know, just one, poetry, and then two, coming from a culture that I get to know, right? Like getting to learn about it, getting to,
Right.
you know, from somebody I think when, you know, when they were talking all those accolades about you, just your knowledge and your background, right away you had me hooked, because this is something that obviously is a large passion there. You visited there, and then you could also talk about this simple form of poetry, like a 10-minute poem. I think that's really cool. Like that's something that I will take away from this, you know, conference, you know, obviously the Zoom conference, you know, format that is really nice. It's nice to see that you're in network, you know, that you're only in Kokomo, and that
Come on up sometime.
Yeah, like that you've had this amazing and enriching experience with the culture that is not your own, but then also that you got to create art, you know, that you had students, you know, submit to, you know, those are things that are truly collegiate. And obviously your past higher education level, we need to be able to bring more of that down to what we do with these adults, or else we're never going to get them, you know, through not only just the barriers of getting a high school diploma, but furthermore getting into something truly academic, you know, in terms of higher ed and community college.
And let me just say again that this has been the one way of teaching poetry, and perhaps the lesson most overall for anything I've taught, where students have that, where they can look at themselves differently. They can look at themselves right now, and then they get that little twist or turn in their own life, you know. And I think that's what worked really good with your refugee students, because one of the ways that I often frame this for the students is, you know, tell me what the world sees in you, perhaps, and then twist or turn it around into who you really are, or what you want them to know about you or your culture or your background or something like that. Look at how the world judges you, and twist and turn that around to make it be about something else. Another of my students who I asked to submit her poem for wrote about her autistic son and about how he's bullied at school. And, you know, and it was really this powerful thing about, this is how you guys see him. This is how, you know, you make him feel. This is how he makes me feel about her son. And it was just, and again, it was one of those, she's like, I'd never written a poem. I'm not a poet. I'm like, you are, you know, there you go. And so, you know, just to be able to see that with the students is just such an amazing thing.
It's such an easy, quick, like, you know, you could do it in one class period and then bring it back as a quick writing exercise. You know, I love that. Those are the little things that you're like, you can tell that your lesson isn't going well. You're like, let's do something different, you know, and this is the type of thing that you can do easily. That's awesome. Those like little, like, you know, whether it's like, you know, you're another weapon in your arsenal, another tool in your shed, like whatever the case may be, those things are invaluable.
Good. Thank you. Anybody else have any questions or anything? And again, feel free to look me up at the Excel Center Kokomo, and you can contact me, and you know, I can share some other Sijo with you, with some of my favorites or some that I've written, or, you know, that kind of thing. No? Okay. Well, I want to thank all of you guys for being here, because this is a bit different than what they usually do for these sessions and stuff. So I wasn't sure how it was going to fly, but I hope that you got something that you can use in your classroom, use with your students, or just use personally if you'd like. If you come up with some ideas or write a great poem here within the next couple of days and want to share it with me, I'd love to see it. So, okay.
All right, thank you.
Thanks so much, Dwayne.
Thank you, Mark.
See you.
Yeah, very good. Okay.
Thank you.